Welcome back, everyone. So excited to launch the closing plenary session of our two-day conference. Again, my profound thanks to all of you for joining us, for being present in the conference for these 2 days, and for everyone who has made it possible. It is my pleasure to introduce our panel. Starting with Tanuja Dehne, President and CEO of the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, Erik Estrada, Community Manager of the Community Foundation of South Jersey, Taneshia Nash Laird, President and CEO of Newark Symphony Hall, and they will be joined shortly by Rick Thigpen, Chairperson of the PSEG Foundation. And we are delighted and honored that Dr. David Campt, founder and principal of the Dialogue Company, is going to be moderating this important discussion. David's opening address at the beginning of the conference was absolutely phenomenal and powerful, and we are so grateful that he is joining us again. So David, let me kick things over to you, and I'll let you get things started. And I just last thing, if you have questions, comments, put them in the chat box, and we'll be watching them, and we will tee them up at various intervals. So please do that as well. Anything else? Okay. David, take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Linda. So nice to be back, y'all. So let me just tell y'all, they have put together an awesome panel. Just incredible. So my job in this panel is just to tee up a couple questions and to do some gentle guiding, because the level of wisdom on this panel is unbelievable. So my hope is that we do a little bit of a journey together, conversational journey, that looks at how should we think about the issue of progress towards equity. I'm thinking of equity as a journey. How should we think about that journey? What are the special challenges and opportunities we should really keep in mind about that? I hope we spend some time on the issue of resistance and how we should best combat that. I talked about that specifically from a conversational standpoint, but there's bigger issues that we need to think about. And then the key takeaways as we launch away from this lovely conference, what is the key things we want to keep in mind? So, and my hope is to have a conversation among the panelists for on the order of half our time, maybe a little more, 45 minutes or so, maybe a little more than that. And then questions from the folks watching. And I certainly hope and encourage the panelists, if they have questions of each other, to feel free to add that. So I want to say a little bit more about the first person I'm asking to speak, who is Taneshia. So first of all, I think her bio is available to y'all, but it's unbelievable. In addition to being her current position as a president of the Newark Symphony Hall, she's worked previously as the executive director of the Princeton Arts Council. She has been director of economic development and acting director for housing production for the city of Trenton, the regional director of the Chamber of Commerce. So, I mean, I could go on and on, but so she knows a lot. And so I want to start out with just pivoting off of an article that she wrote for Medium. She wrote an article for Medium that caused a lot of buzz, called Your 3-Step Uncomplicated Formula for a More Diverse, Equitable, and Inclusive Workplace. So it seemed like it's really a simplifying thing. And in our preliminary talk as the panel, she was like, well, it don't need to be that complicated. So I'm really interested in, Tanesha, if you could say a little bit about your perspective about how easy or hard this journey is, and what are the key things to keep in mind as we try to guide a nonprofit or a foundation towards more equity.
To unmute myself so you all could hear me. Thank you for that introduction. In our prep call, I believe it was Erik who mentioned that it really takes commitment. And I agree with that. I think when you're looking and talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it has to be something that is not an add-on. It has to be what you do, the lens through which you view everything. So I talked about at the Arts Council of Princeton, you know, I didn't really think I was doing what people call diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was just making sure that we were being true to sort of 3 things, right? And I thank you because I see the link is put in the chat. The first was to just make sure that we are in alignment with our mission. And in that case, at the Arts Council of Princeton, our mission was building community through the arts. And as I looked at all of our programs, it was clear that the community was not really represented in one particular place, and that was the programming that we had in our theater. And so there was some things that you can read about that I did to make sure that we really reflected that wider community. The second thing was, Trenton, excuse me, so many cities in my head. Princeton is considered a sanctuary town, a sanctuary city, and it's about equity. And one of the things that I looked at, and it was actually the program person from the Dodge Foundation who came in and said, tell me a little bit about the profile of your teaching artists. And I was fairly new at that time. We had about 98 teaching artists. So I called in my director of education and asked her for a profile of them. And what we found is that we probably only had 5 teaching artists of color out of all of them. And again, we had 90 something teaching artists. And so I then started picking up the phone and calling artists of color and saying, why aren't you teaching here? And then they highlighted what they saw as barriers to them being able to teach there. And so we created a professional development program to essentially diversify our teaching artist pool. And then the final thing is sort of this idea of inclusion. We were approached by an organization that works with adults who are differently abled, some would say profoundly disabled, about putting together an arts program for them. And we were, I believe, the only organization that said, yes, we'll do that. And what I thought that said is, we see you, this arts is for everybody, you are included. And so when I describe this to people and they say, well, how long did it take you to get all this stuff done, to change our programming in our theater, to do this professional development training program, to create this program for differently abled people? This must have taken a long time, because obviously it also took resources, capital. I said, oh no, we got it done in about 12 months. So I think, and with commitment, you can really sort of do these things. And so I really encourage people to really just start with their mission, to think about their values, and then model humanity. So thank you.
Got you. So I want to ask a little follow-up on that first thing you said. You said you did a little bit to align the mission, and then you kind of, you just alluded to that. Say a little more about that part.
Well, people, all organizations, we have these missions, right? And so we write the mission, and I think it's important that you live the mission and all aspects of that. Again, when I looked at who we are, and let me just say this, I most definitely came in with a different lens. My lens is as a Black woman. My lens was as a Black woman going to lead a predominantly white institution. So as I looked around, although I will admit I missed the teaching artist thing, so I had to get somebody to highlight that for me. As I looked around, it was clear to me that the audience and who we were there to serve, and if the idea is building community through the arts, and the people who live right in that neighborhood is the Witherspoon Johnson neighborhood, which was historically African American, but now is predominantly immigrant from Central and South America, and they weren't even coming into the building. And so if the idea is building community through the arts, how do we make sure that we're actually living the mission? So living the mission in all senses. And typically I would say people think that they need to, I'm dealing with this on a board that I sit on right now, rewrite the mission to make sure that it says things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's okay if you need that as a reminder, but most likely your mission fully encompasses what you need to have diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right. It's almost like just looking at it with almost like with an equity lens, like to say, are we really doing that in light of this difficult problem called equity, right?
You have to have it with that lens. Like I said, it cannot be an add-on. And that's one of the things that I also fear, that a lot of people are approaching this as an add-on and not something that they just do as part of everything that they do.
Got you. Okay. Okay. So I want to hold that in our heads, a kind of a simplified approach with 3 different dimensions, and that's really helpful. So I want to now go to Tanuja. Dehne is about Dehne, right? Or is it Dehne?
Dehne, you got it.
Dehne, okay. So another impressive person on the panel. So in addition to being president and CEO of the Dodge Foundation, previously she was for a while was a C-level executive with NRG Energy, like a Fortune 250 company. So, and she's on a couple of corporate boards and done a lot of things in that high cotton environment of making things happen institutionally. And now she recently, or I think it was recently, came out with a kind of an equity document by Dodge that's a little more complicated than the 3-part system that Taneshia talked about. None of these things are not at war, but I'll be interested in your reflections about how you think about the journey towards equity. And if you want to say a little bit about that framework, that's fine. But the most important thing is, how should we think about it? And like, your framework is a little more complicated. So say more about how we should think about that journey towards equity.
So thank you, David, and thank you, Linda, and I'm just so honored to be here, and it's so wonderful to see everyone's faces here on this Zoom. Yeah, I'm going to go back to something that Taneshia said about modeling humanity. You know, this work, this equity work, this anti-oppression, anti-racism work, this journey that Dodge is on and many organizations are on, is about the restoration of humanity. And it's drawn from this authentic desire, as Erik said, a commitment. And it really just starts in our heart and souls. And fundamentally, that's not easy. That's challenging. And Dodge has been on our equity journey for just about 5 years. And we have learned a great deal about ourselves individually and collectively as a foundation and our work. And, you know, some days it's 2 steps forward, other days it's 3 steps back, because this is challenging work. And what I would say is that organizations, as they think about their journeys, is that they should accept and honor where they are on these journeys, but really be honest with themselves about what are their motivations and desires when they're thinking about equity and applying an equity lens, because it absolutely cannot be an add-on. You know, when we shared our equity framework, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, you know, one of the things we shared with our grantees when we were rolling this out is, please don't twist yourself into a pretzel. And that came up a lot. Don't twist yourself into a pretzel to try to conform and check the box, because that's not doing yourself and your clients and the community any service. So I say it really comes down to just start where you are and really be honest and authentic in this commitment. So as I mentioned, the entire Dodge team, Dodge board and staff, this took us about 5 years to put together as a team, this equity framework. It's a tool, a conversation, a facilitation conversation starter that we use, and we will be really applying more intentionally in 2021 with our grantees. And it's, you know, it's got 7 lenses that we think about when we're thinking about applying an equity lens. And it's really about mindset and impact and the work that organizations are doing. And again, it's one tool, it's a conversation starter. And as we think about it, you know, when you look at 7 lenses and you look at a rubric, you know, the path of least resistance is to say, so tell me what's the magic wand? What do I need to do? What do I need to do here? And what we would rather see is folks really taking this, going back to their organizations and really authentically thinking about who are the people, who are the communities we're serving, and what does our organization look like, and our own organizational culture and dynamics, and what can we do to start modeling the behaviors and modeling equity ourselves. And so I'll just stop there because we have so much to talk about and so many great voices to hear. Back to you, David. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So I want to move next to Erik Estrada, who's with the Community Foundation of South Jersey. And I think Erik's been in that position for about a year, right, Erik?
Relatively new, yes.
Right. So before that, he had multiple roles with Robert Wood Johnson. He launched a program called Forward Promise, which is focused on men and boys of color, obviously an important underserved population. And he's been with the Urban League Fellows Program. I mean, again, another brother who has a lot to offer to help us think about this issue. So what would be your sort of top of mind reflections on how should we think about this journey towards greater equity? If we want to really move our organization, get momentum about this, you know, Taneshia talked about the 3 big picture almost themes. Tanuja talked about the lens of the 7 elements. What would be your suggestion as the most important things to think about as we really try to increase momentum on that journey?
Thanks, conference happening and to let me be a part of it. You know, at first I was a little nervous about the virtual format. You know, how would we have dialogue? But it was great to even just pick up on where Taneshia and Tanuja just left off. Taneshia talked about coming in with a different lens. Tanuja talked about how difficult this work is and how challenging it is. And I would say, if anything, the only piece I could offer is just that to do it, we need to be vulnerable. We need to be comfortable knowing that we're going to make mistakes, that we don't have the answers, and that we're just trying to do this work better. You named a couple of the places, but I've been very fortunate to work with programs connected to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, New Jersey Health Initiatives, Forward Promise, the Andrus Family Fund out of New York, and the Cerna Foundation. And I think one of the things we've always tried to do is say, how do we do this work better? And I recognize it's a bit, maybe not a contradiction, but it's a bit odd that foundations, philanthropy, a sector that, you know, for just being honest, it's built on endowments and wealth created with stolen labor on stolen land. And so for us to come here and talk about how folks should be doing their work better is a little backwards. And so I will keep my comments brief because I do want to really open up the time for the conversation. But I think the only way we navigate this murky and challenging space is by being vulnerable, being open, being honest with ourselves, and having the difficult conversations instead of avoiding them, instead of sweeping them under the rug and thinking that things are going to magically get better.
Okay, guys. So that theme of being honest, being vulnerable, is coming up over and over again. So we're going to keep that in mind as an important challenge to do that. So we also have on the panel Rick Thigpen, another very impressive panelist. He is the chair of the PSEG Foundation, senior vice president of corporate citizenship. It has so many positions in the past. Before joining PSEG, he was a state governmental affairs head of PSEG. He has been in his career. He's been district director for Representative Donald Payne, executive director of New Jersey State Committee. So again, somebody who has a lot of institutional experience. In our plenary call the other day, he made the comment that it is really important that we encourage people to think hard about these issues of trying to make a journey towards equity. So I want to ask Rick, what is it most important? What are the top 2 or 3 things that people need to think hard about if they really want to do well in moving momentum towards equity?
Thank you, David. Thank you for the kind words also. So a very tricky question. So my first statement is equity is not for the faint at heart. Equity is about challenging the status quo And the significance of equity, we've just touched on it a little bit. The greater significance of equity is about addressing inequality in the past. So that can lead us down some very, very challenging roads with people in conversations, right? But equity, to me, is a great concept, and it's a great forum for conversation, and it's great to see so many people interested in it. And it really has a signal of a brighter future for all of us to talk about how we can achieve a more equitable community and society and how we can pursue equity in the future. But I think my one unique situation is I am the chair of a corporate foundation, which is a little bit of a different situation than the others on this panel. So we have a whole series of other considerations that a corporation brings to the table. And so many of those considerations make the conversation about equity far more challenging and far less free for us to simply express our views of what's important and what's right and what's wrong. Corporation has a very important interest in how it is presented to the community as well. So equity is something we are working very hard on. I think, from where I stand, and I think it's different as a corporate foundation, equity is one of the ways we are going to build bridges to many of the communities that are emerging in New Jersey for the future. Equity is one of the ways that public service is going to become a partner in the future, even for those who didn't consider it a partner in the past. And I live in a state where I know there's a lot of people who do feel that about the past. So it's a practical tool for us. It inspires lots of controversy. I have the privilege of working with many people who think that the word equity disadvantages the majority population of public service. And whether you're right or wrong is a whole separate conversation, but that's a reality that has to be managed. And I don't think I'm going to be alone on this call with interacting with people who think using equity is about disadvantaging certain people in exchange for advantaging those who you, in the view of that person, those who you favor, who think they deserve more. So what is fair and what is right is a very much a moving target and subject to heavy dialogue. David alluded to it. I used to work in the world of politics, and I will go so far as to say that our national election showed that equity has lots of people willing to vote against it. And we should have no doubt about that. And there is no doubt that equity is a controversial and challenging aspect for certain people, and many people don't want equity, especially the way we're defining it here. So I'm mindful of it. It doesn't reduce my admiration for what people here are talking about doing, and I recognize the enormous importance of equity. I mean, I can personalize it. I have 3 children. Equity means greater opportunity for my children than would have otherwise been available if things didn't continue to improve and progress in this country. So I have a personal stake in it as well. But I just thought it was important for us to remember that equity is a very controversial figure. Equity means overturning the status quo. And if you want to preserve the status quo and you're for equity, it's an interesting conversation that we should inspire. Which parts are you willing to change, right? And it's not the whole status quo. I'm not talking as a revolutionary, but equity is really about changing our status quo, or transforming our status quo. And that has lots of opponents for it. And I just thought it was important to include that in the conversation as we pursue the goal I think we all want of a brighter future for everybody. And at the end of the day, the last thing I'll say is, if you're going to pick a fight, it's going to be about everybody deserves to be treated equally. But we know there is some things in the past that need to be addressed in order for that to be the reality of our future.
So Rick, thank you so much, Rick. So I want to follow up on something you said at the beginning, and that has to do with your position as with the corporate foundation. So, and by the way, I'm going to come to you next, Erik, on this same question. So could you say a little bit more about how discussions about equity, how the position of it, how the view of it from a corporate standpoint, how that, what are some characteristics of that we should be aware of? Because some of the people on this call might want to get corporate money, or might want to enter or corporate donations, et cetera, or grant making. So say more about what you mean by the special view of that from the corporate standpoint.
All right, you're not trying to get me fired, are you?
No, we need you in your job, brother.
Right.
I ain't trying to get you fired at all.
Sorry, I was just asking. So there's no doubt that this year made this conversation easier. The killing of George Floyd and the political reaction and the protests put this conversation in front of everybody to talk about. And so extremely important. You know, for a corporation has that business interest fundamental first and foremost, but we have a brand to protect, and we have a lot of different voices to consider when we represent, you know, equity for the corporation. So I'll try to personalize it. Having public service engage in a dialogue on equity also opens the door to a dialogue on internal equity, a very, very warm, if not very hot potato. That's not something everybody else has got to talk about. Equity also is about, so we are headquartered in Newark. And, you know, so what does equity entail as an obligation to the residents of Newark, who we also call customers? What does equity entail as an obligation for public service enterprise group, for people who are less fortunate than others? Are we prepared to recognize inequality in the past as a reason for equity for the future? You know, it goes back to court to me. You know, why in the world do you need to change things? Things have been fine. So why are you doing this? Giving people preference, is how some people phrase it, right? And if you don't have that recognition that there's some things in the past to correct, why are you embracing equity going forward in the future? So we have lots of voices to listen to. In my particular word, many of those voices, the voices of engineers, not people who are engaged in the community activities. They're focused on business and focused on their professional expertise. And they don't necessarily have sensitivity to these issues, or they don't know the Taneshia Lairds of the world. And, you know, why are we trying to connect with people like that? We've been doing fine the way we've been going, right? So it just brings in a whole series of extra considerations. And then the corporation has a profit motive, which I cannot ignore. And that also is another factor that makes this more complicated for us. And I could really go on, but I don't think that's appropriate here.
Okay, I got you. So I'm going to sort of circle back the other direction. So Erik, you're with a community foundation. And so I'm wondering, I would imagine that some of the donors are sort of equity forward in their thinking, and others maybe less so. So could you say a little bit about the challenges and the opportunities that you have confronted as you try to advance equity agenda that are set up, that are influenced by the fact that your position right now in the community foundation?
Absolutely. I mean, I think as a community foundation, yes, a majority of the assets that we're able to deploy to try to improve the community are directly tied to donors. So as Rick mentioned, you know, they are a very important and key stakeholder. But at the community foundation, as a community foundation, the other key stakeholders are the community. And I think, you know, while folks run the gamut in terms of their beliefs, thoughts, desires, and how they think they can do this work better, I think that's a part of even what I was trying to say in introducing myself, that in being vulnerable, and I think Tanuja really hinted at it, we need to be authentic. And I think we do need to bring our authentic selves to this work, because, again, piggybacking on what Taneshia said, I entered the world of philanthropy as an outsider. Now, for the last 10 plus years, I've been in it. So it's hard for me to try to pretend like I bring this outside perspective. You know, yes, I came from a very different place than my peers at the time, but no, now I'm a part of this world. But by bringing this outside perspective, bringing my whole self to this work and bringing all that history, culture, community with me, it was noticed that we were able to do the work better. And I think that's what we're all starting to recognize, that when everybody else does that too, it's not that one person is bringing the right approach or the right perspective, but when all of those, you know, when there are all those different perspectives being authentically heard, considered, acted on, the work is done better. And so all those stakeholders who have whatever their motivations might be, they see, oh, this is why we need to do this work. And I would hope that's something that comes from this panel is folks recognize that, yes, there's a moral imperative to this work. Yes, there's a business case for this work. We can make more money doing this. But if you really want to do the work of trying to improve community, trying to do whatever, advance whatever mission you have, you can't ignore the inequities that currently exist and can't ignore the problems that created them and continue to perpetuate them and think you're going to get, anywhere where you're trying to go. Like Rick said, you'll be stuck with the status quo.
But it's also, I'm sorry to interrupt, David.
Go ahead, please.
It's also one of the key things that has to happen is what you just said, what you said earlier, Erik, is that acknowledge that we are on stolen land. We are on the Lenape land here, and built with stolen labor, right? And so there's that historical acknowledgement of the inequities that you don't even have to go back to the 1500s, right? You can go all the way back to, well, why is Newark the way that Newark is? You look at the redlining maps and you see that people that look like me could not participate, or I'll make it more directly, my father-in-law, when he came back from World War II, he could not benefit from all of the things that veterans benefited from. He could not move into the suburban community that was made available for people. He could not have access. We could not have access to loans. My mother could not vote. My mother was born in 1941. She could not vote until the passage of the Voting Rights Act. So this is not ancient history, but to what Rick was saying, you have engineers who don't necessarily want to hear any of that. So there has to be an acknowledge of how we got here in order for people, exactly in the last 50 years, the GI Bill, redlining, subprime loans, that's now. This is not ancient history. I would imagine that everybody that showed up to this session, though, has acknowledged all of these things. So we're essentially preaching to the choir here with this particular audience. But we're talking about when you go back and you need to do the work in your respective organizations. And I just want to go back to the framework. Yes, I do say, it should not be that hard if you're coming from an authentic place. But I do think that tools such as the one that was created by the Dodge Foundation, and that tool did not exist at that time. But I did have Sharnita Johnson from the Dodge Foundation who said, what does your teaching artist pool look like? So it was something that made me have to reflect. And I think those things are important because it gave a baseline that we could move from. And that's why I think those tools are important.
So I got you. Thank you for that. So I want to sort of shift into a conversation that essentially is about resistance. And y'all have been talking about that. And I think Taneshia, what you just did was acknowledge where we are likely as a group. So we need to, I want to make sure we probe, what does it mean? What does resistance look like? And how do we deal with it? Because that's a practical question. So in light of that, I want to sort of probe something that Erik said about how if you don't acknowledge equity, you really can't move forward. And I want to push back on that and ask Tanuja, you're a grant maker. Do you not have some nonprofit heads who are not kind of on board with the equity thing? And I would imagine that you might. And I guess I'm wondering how you deal with that. And as a way of beginning to probe, how do we address resistance? I mean, you're the funder, but I'm just saying, if you could say a little bit about how you address that, because my feeling is there's a whole bunch of people not addressing equity, and in the short and medium run, they think they'll be fine. We know that in the long run, they might not be fine, but they think that they are fine. And so the challenge of moving them forward is something we all need to think about.
So when I think about resistance, it really comes down to the fact that change is hard. But when we're talking about resistance and when we're talking about anti-racism and equity, it's about power. That power needs to be shared. It needs to be given up. We need to let it go. And that's why, we keep coming back to authenticity. We need to take a hard look in the mirror, because at the end of the day, people don't want to give up their power. And so we're having those hard looks in the mirror at the Dodge Foundation. In the fall, we launched Imagine a New Way. This is imagining a new way, centering our work and our commitment to anti-racism and racial equity and justice. But this is also about the model of philanthropy itself and transforming that. And our role, Dodge's role, is just one foundation in democratizing power, redistributing wealth, the wealth that we've accumulated. How can we make the greatest impact in shifting economic control? This is a transformation of a sector, and this is all about power. And so, you know, when we're talking about resistance, it really comes down to, you know, in having conversations with whoever it might be in our sphere and circles. It's about the power sharing and giving up the power. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. And so when we're having conversations and with whoever it may be about equity or anti-racism, anti-oppression, and if there is resistance, it is natural. And I think what's really important is that we approach this work with humility and compassion, and not in a frame of shaming either, because that is not going to lead to constructive dialogue and change either. But it's just confronting it. It's just confronting the fact that this is change, and this is of letting go and sharing, or just giving up some power. And I'll just leave it at that, because I could go on.
I want to follow up a little bit. Can you give an example in light of the really great journey you guys are on, so we can really see it? Like, what is it? Is there an example of the one thing you've done that, or something you've seen, perhaps one of your grantees, that represents the kind of giving up of power that we're talking about? Because I guess part of what I struggle with in this kind of conversation is that I understand what that means theoretically, right? Because we have white folks on top, and we're trying to change that. And so when people say you got to be willing to give up power, I get it sort of conceptually, but it would help me, and maybe some people on the call, if you could say more about what it actually looks like to do that. Like, what are a couple of illustrations of that, either that you've seen your foundation, other foundations, or nonprofits that you've supported? What does that look like?
So I'll give a real example. As I'm the president and CEO of the Dodge Foundation, I have a lot of power, and I recognize that. And sometimes it's just really easy to make decisions by myself. And I just know that that is not always appropriate. And there's many, many different leadership styles. And one of the things that, I've tried to do, but I'm going to admit it is not easy. But one of the things we did with respect to our COVID-19 grant making, and most recently with some of our election integrity grants, was we opened up the decision making for the entire organization to come in and say, we need to move quickly. We need to ensure that, we can do what we can to ensure the integrity of our elections in the state of New Jersey. And our group came together, quickly made decisions internally in a consensus decision-making power. We named it, we were explicit. And in record time, we deployed funding for election integrity. And that was just practicing. That is practicing. And that I just give you inside baseball at the Dodge Foundation of how what I'm trying to do as a person who has a great deal of power. And I admit that, and I'm trying to share it, but it's not easy. This is a practice. You have to keep trying at it. One of the things that we're exploring is participatory grant making, and how we can bring community in. We still have to define what that means. Community calling the question, community deploying the dollars and decision making. This is something we're exploring, something we're hoping to try different pilots in 2021 and beyond as part of our commitment to anti-racism and racial equity and justice. We got to try. We got to try things. Some things will work, some things won't. But so those are just two examples that I would share. But so a little inside baseball and things that we're working on.
David, can I jump in with an example too? I mean, so one, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. The Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, PSEG Foundation, New Jersey Health Initiatives, Wells Fargo Regional, Ocean First Foundation in New Jersey, and if I miss someone, I'm terribly sorry, have all committed to a project that we're doing at the Community Foundation of South Jersey called Transform South Jersey. And to be honest, if you were paying attention to all the things that I've said so far, I wrestle with philanthropy and my role in philanthropy and all this, but I chose to come to the Community Foundation of South Jersey, or at least I applied to try to get that job because of what we're doing. And so what we're doing, in short, oversimplified, we've picked 6 communities. We're working with them to build their own endowed community fund, and advisory boards in those local communities will get to decide. They will get to make recommendations about where the grants go based on what matters to them. It's not perfect, but it's a step towards that direction of really saying, we aren't the experts. We aren't the ones that know what's best for any XYZ. You are. And so let's work with you all, invest in your capacity, and let y'all make those decisions.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, I think I'm getting closer in those past examples. I want to ask anyone on the panel, but especially Rick or Taneshia, are there any illustrations you've seen just in your work with nonprofits, or just your view of the nonprofit sector, of other examples of what it means to give up power? Because what Tanuja and Erik talked about was, I mean, I can see it when you're a grant maker, right? And you're talking about moving the locus of decision making out to communities. I get that, and and it's difficult because you have a responsibility to use the money well, and you have certain practices that you've done where it's you get to decide that, and so letting that go in light of an equitable imperative, I get that. If we go sort of down or look at the other part of the ecosystem, the actual nonprofits who are also trying to move towards equity, are there any illustrations of what it means to be willing to do the giving up of power that equity involves, that it would be useful to highlight for people?
I want to look at that a different way, but I hope it still answers your question. I'm really thinking more about empowering, right? So I'm not sure if it's a zero-sum thing, that as I seek to empower people that I don't know. So I'm just going to talk about what I'm doing in the role that I'm in now. So in the role that I'm in now, we are embarking on a very significant historic preservation project of Newark Symphony Hall. That was what I decided to leave Princeton to go to the Newark Symphony Hall. I did so because I saw that there was a lot of investment going into the city, and given what you read of my bio, I've experienced rapid gentrification, whether it was in Harlem, Brooklyn, not rapid in Trenton, but it's happening. And so what I was concerned about is, how do I go in and mitigate that, right? Because in the Performing Arts Center, I know it sounds crazy, right? But, you want investment. What you don't want is displacement. And so what I'm seeking to do is empower the community, that this particular renovation is going to create 500 jobs and create opportunities for 50 small businesses. And I looked at what would prevent the community from being able to take advantage of this. And so what we're seeking to do is to empower the community through upskilling and giving them power, right? I don't want to say that it is I'm giving them anything. I'm giving them an opportunity for them to take advantage, and so they can be empowered, learn historic preservation, construction trades, get those jobs, be able to, and I hope, close a wealth gap that unfortunately exists in the city of Newark, where nearly 1 out of every 3 people live below the poverty line. So that is the kind of thing that we're seeking to do to empower folks. We're also doing that on what we actually do in terms of our programming, and we've decided to center local performing artists in that programming. I don't need to say of color, because that's what we are in Newark. We're predominantly people of color. And so by bringing people into opportunities and rooms that they don't typically get to, that is a way that they become empowered. I've sought to do this in my career. When I looked at the staff, for instance, that I inherited and found some skills gaps there, helped by creating some professional development programs. And so naturally, me as a not-for-profit, I'm hoping that I can appeal to funders to understand that this is a way that they could meet their commitment. You know, when I was looking at doing some of this work, even creating a sort of an internal theater academy, if you will, theater management academy, it was talking to someone on the outside who said, listen, if you open that up to other people, you now are going to help create a pipeline of people of color on the arts administration side that doesn't already exist. So I like to look at it as empowerment, because I think it's very, I know, when I start talking to people about giving up their power, that's just a whole, that frame is just not going to work. It's not going to work. So what I like to do is say, here, can you partner with me to empower the people, my colleagues, empower us, empower our community? That's a much different conversation than, I'll never forget, I read a book by Ellis Coase, and I hope you guys see where I'm going with this. And the book was called A Rage of a Privileged Class. And he basically talks about Black folks who worked to become middle class and upper middle class, and all of the microaggressions that they constantly have to confront. And there was a point in that book where he talked about, he was talking to a guy saying, all we want is some set aside, right? A white man. All we want is some set aside. Why can't we have this? And he said, what do you want? And the white man said, everything. He didn't want to give up anything. So when you're talking to people about giving up stuff, that it's just not, I just don't recommend you talk about it. I know that that is important. I acknowledge that Tanuja is doing what she can to do that and has put herself in a situation where she knows she has power and she's looking to give it up. But I guarantee you that most of the other people are not looking to give up their power.
Yeah, I think that people, I certainly, that is not a natural inclination almost for any human being to want to give up power, right? So I get you. So Rick, I again want to throw that question to you. Are there any examples of the kind of shifts in thinking that you've seen nonprofits or nonprofit directors make, or that are in light of the kind of new thinking? Maybe it's sacrificing power, maybe it's empowering people, but it embodies the kind of shift that we're saying happens if you really look at yourself honestly, really look at your organization honestly, and then to move equity forward.
So interesting. So first off, I want to associate myself with what Taneshia said about empowerment, right? Equity has got to be about creating a brighter future and creating opportunity and expanding the pie. Because if it's about a zero-sum game or disempowering people, you know, I think somebody once said power concedes nothing without demand. It changes the whole framework, and asking people to give up power is probably not worth the breath that that we have in us. And then I also admire what Tanuja said, and I got to be careful. Transforming the model of philanthropy and living up to that standard is no little challenge, right? And we are hopefully doing some of that ourselves, right? So this is important. First off, I want to invite people on this call who are thinking about equity. We at Public Service want to hear from you at the PSEG Foundation, because equity is an important part of how we are evaluating our giving going forward. And equity is really a useful framework to help talk about brighter future in different communities. And David, if I were to take you down Bergen Street in Newark, you know that just giving a grant is not the solution to the problem. Our country has created some things that must be recreated or undone if we're going to go forward. And how we talk about doing that is the challenge, right? But going down Bergen Street, it's not a simple solution in Newark. It's not a simple solution to just say, oh, we're going to be different tomorrow and forget about what we did yesterday. So there is that complicated conversation to have. So we are sponsoring an initiative called Powering Equity and Social Justice. That's public service lingo, right? We are trying to make equity part of our giving strategy, and we want to hear from those who are thinking about equity and how to use equity to help transform communities. We want to be one of the increased resources people can pursue if that is something they're interested in. So we're trying to be a positive inspiration ourselves and trying to keep up with the Dodge Foundation in some degree to help transform the model of philanthropy, to use equity as a way to build a brighter future, to empower people, and to empower people in the majority community as well. Because I used to live in South Orange, New Jersey, and I spent years listening to people who would not go anywhere near Newark because they're scared of it, dangerous, this, that, and the other thing. And in fact, that will empower everybody by having all of our communities places where people are willing to travel, willing to visit. It's going to make our economy stronger. It's going to create economic opportunity. It's going to make for better communities and a brighter future for everybody, and hopefully a greater degree of opportunity and a lesser degree of people feeling that their opportunity has been robbed because they gave it to you, or they gave it to you because the way you look, or because the way you look, or something like that. So no little challenge. Transformation of the model of philanthropy. Philanthropy can't change the world itself, but we do have a role to play, and hopefully the Public Service Foundation is one of those partners. And we're hoping that powering equity and social justice is one of the initiatives that we can use to help be a part of that transformation and making equity be something that's on more and more tongues and is more and more a part of how people think about the future.
Rick, I'm glad it's resonating. I'm really glad it's resonating.
No little thing.
I just wanted to, I would be remiss if I didn't share, empowering is absolutely critical. It's part of a multi-pronged strategy to effectuate this vision. But one of the things that we've launched this fall at the Dodge Foundation is a learning to applied and adoption practice of anti-racism and anti-oppression. And we've got about 400 individuals in the state of New Jersey participating in this program, including Dodge board and staff, representing about 120 organizations in the state of New Jersey. And what's really exciting about this work is the multiplier effect, because this isn't a training. This is a 5-month-long application. And as a participant myself, our board and staff are participants. It's really quite amazing to see the kind of the conversations and how board members and staff members from organizations are coming together, having these conversations within their organizations and thinking about how they transform their organizations. So we just launched it. It's a 5-month-long program, but we're hoping that this is the kind of impact we'd love to see in terms of kind of the movement building, and to acknowledge also that Dodge is really, we're joining a movement. And so anyway, I'd be remiss if I didn't share that. And I know that a number of folks on this call have been participating.
Thank you for doing that. All right, this has been really great. I want to get real with y'all for a second. I'm gonna try to get to a higher level of let's get to brass tacks. Let us presume that everybody on this call is on some level on board the increased equity train. And most of the people on this call are working for nonprofits. They're not in the foundation sector. They're working for nonprofits, either executive directors or somewhere else in there. And they're on this call because they care about advancing equity agenda. Some people are super passionate about it. Some people know they need to do it for whatever. My question is this: are there some things, are the challenges of doing that, and opportunities of doing that, different for people of color versus white people? You're in a nonprofit setting, executive director or not, you're trying to be a force to advance that. And I'm just wondering, if you have any reflections on, are the challenges at all different? Of course, they're somewhat similar, but I'm just saying that as I see the diversity of faces on this call, and I'm listening to what y'all are talking about, I'm thinking the challenges, the particular lessons to be learned, the insights might be a little different depending on your own status. So I'm interested in, if y'all telling me I'm crazy, that's cool, but I want to ask the question.
My work necessarily requires allies. I'm a Black woman leading an organization and a predominantly community of color with a Black and brown staff. That's it.
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, nonprofits led by people of color, serving people of color, and when we say led, we're talking about the board and executive staff. All of that have traditionally been underfunded and under-resourced and asked to do more than their fair share of work. So if you are trying to ask the nonprofit sector to try to do something new, regardless if it's ingrained in how they were doing their work or not, but maybe now they need to say, or now they need to have a diversity and equity inclusion statement in their strategic plan. Who has the resources to hire the consultant to craft a well-written one? the people that already had the resources, which are probably going to be the white-led organizations that had, that already had them. So absolutely, there are more challenges because there are less resources. But to that point, and because yes, we all need allies. I can't just keep pointing the finger in one direction. I think it is a different set of issues because one group is probably thinking about how they give up power, and it's not easy for anybody.
I didn't put out a Black Lives Matter statement, for instance, because it was just, I thought it was ridiculous. What were we doing? We were actually doing stuff during that time. During the time where everybody else was shut down, I hired 10 Black artists to do a project with us, which thank you again, the Dodge Foundation ultimately came and supported that, but we actually started it first, and we were feeding people in the community. We didn't publicize it. We were actually doing stuff, and that's typical of organizations that are Black led, serving communities of color, people of color led, serving. We do the stuff, right? So we don't have to make these big statements about this.
Well, okay, this is this is what I'm trying to probe, for example. So you didn't feel a need to do that because you're already doing things that are much bigger than doing a sign. But kind of what I'm trying to get to is, had you been a white person with a similar mindset of attitude toward equity, you might have still faced pressure to do that. That might have been harder to resist, maybe, right? So, and that I guess I'm just trying to see.
And got pat on the back after you did it too, right? It's like, oh.
Right. I guess what I'm trying to do is to probe whatever lessons or insights that y'all might have about, like, when we get down to individuals who are trying to advance the agenda and what they should be thinking about, the world they're navigating, even the resistance they might be navigating. I'm just wondering whether or not there's your sense is that who they are has implications for either the resistance they're facing or their opportunities to combat it.
I think it's very difficult. Listen, I said something in our prep, but I also was thinking about that a little bit more. It's very difficult for me not to see the world as a cisgender Black woman, right? It is what I am, right? So that's kind of how I navigate through the world. I think it's also difficult for other people who are not people of color to do the same, to not, I talked to you about that person that I know, who I had business in the private sector interactions with, who in his late 60s said to me, unironically, that I was only the second Black woman that he'd ever done anything with professionally. And the fact that he could navigate, and now he's a Wall Street guy, the fact that he could navigate his entire career without ever having to interact with someone that looks like me professionally in any kind of business dealings, just shows you how big the chasm is in our nation. So it's work.
Okay, gotcha. Tanuja, what do you think? Are there challenges and opportunities for advancing this? Is there a different flavor depending on who you are?
I think it is. I think it is a different flavor depending on who you are using your words. I think we all approach this work from the from where we came from and our upbringings. And I am a woman of color, but I am not a Black woman. And I am a child of immigrants. We just have different perspectives. I have 30 years of a career assimilating in white dominant culture. And I am in the midst of my own personal process of unlearning all of that in order to name sharing power. And so when I say it's hard, it's coming to terms with those realities I've risen up through the ranks of executive and corporate board because I have assimilated. And no more. So now it's about, really authentically, what does diversity mean? We're not just recruiting and bringing on diverse people for tokenism. We need to hear the voices, and those of us in power need to uplift and make sure those voices are heard. And what are we going to do about it? So yeah, I do think, but we all bring different perspectives to this. And so, and I'm not going to discount any perspective, but there's just a lot of, you know, personal journey in there, but at the end of the day, it's not about any one individual either. And I just want to make sure that's super clear as well.
Sure. I want to acknowledge a question from Amy that we're going to defer for a little bit. It has to do with recommendations for specific grants or programs for school districts. So I want to acknowledge that. And I want to hold Linda, let's hold me accountable for making sure we get back to that. Before we get down to that kind of a detail, I still want to keep the conversation a little bit longer at the kind of strategic level as opposed to the practicals on that. So let me ask this question this way. So you got people on this call who really want to advance an equity agenda for their organization. Looking at all the stuff you've seen in terms of groups trying to make advancement, I mean, we've talked about some of the frameworks, whether it's a 3-part or the lens, et cetera. What are the biggest misconceptions or mistakes that people need to make sure they don't do if they're trying to really be effective at advancing that cause? We've talked so much about the why, and I want to move a little bit more into the how and potentially what y'all have learned about key things for that how. Mistakes.
I kind of thought about that because I've started with some negative. Let me add some positive to this. Just like I talk about the election, more Americans than ever before voted for change. More people than ever before realized we've got to do better and we can do better. And so there's a great opportunity for us to come together all around moving forward. And there is no doubt that equity is a useful lens for so many different perspectives to come together to work towards a brighter future. It doesn't have to be, you got to give something up for me, you know, I'm good, you're bad. We can work together on equity as a positive thing to make our communities better from a bunch of different perspectives. And then the answer to your question is always a tricky one, right? Everybody has to be who they are. And it's a beautiful thing, everybody is who they are. You don't have to be like me or like somebody else to talk about equity at all. And everybody, I know how much I learn when everybody does it from their own perspective. A genuine interest in equity from wherever you happen to be right now is a beautiful thing from my point of view. And I won't speak entirely for my foundation, but I know equity can take many different faces to improve communities. But it's so important to have some sense of equity. I use Bergen Street as an example. We have a past that we have to live with and that we need to make a brighter future, not by ignoring the past and the things that have gone on, but by embracing the fact that we're going to go forward together, regardless of what happened in the past, right? So understanding what's going on in your community, having a plan to achieve some level of equity in your own way, being proud of who you are and what you're trying to accomplish. You know, we're not asking you to be like me or think like me or have your politics like me and to do equity. Equity can work in so many different communities. It can work on so many different issues and from so many different perspectives. And there's a role for everybody in making this brighter future. So to me, it is a level of sincerity that you are trying, a level of analysis from who you are and where you sit to the step you're trying to take to make us better, and a willingness to talk about your plan, right? Who are the people you're targeting to be affected by your program? It doesn't always have to be Bergen Street in Newark. It can be people in Chatham or people in Short Hills or people in Haddonfield. There's so many different elements of equity. And I think it really opens the door that we don't have to agree on the past or the future on politics, but we can all work together. And more people than ever before express themselves in America that they're open for that brighter future. So it's not all bad. So I do want to emphasize some optimism and emphasize that everybody has a role and anybody can play a role. You don't have to be a believer the same way I am.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I love the idea that equity was on the ballot and equity won, but not by a lot, right? Not by as much as we all would have hoped, right?
Right. But it got more votes than anybody who's ever run for president before. So it's not all bad either.
There's a comment I want to pick up on that chat in just a minute. I just want to give, before we go to that, I want to see if any other three panelists had anything to add to the whole notion of misconceptions, mistakes, things that people that are common and that can be potholes or sidetracks to people effectively pushing the equity agenda forward.
I would say one thing is, and we've learned this as we've rolled out the framework, is that it's just not one size fits all. There's no easy fix. And that, this work takes time. And so it really goes back to this fundamental theme of, an authentic desire to effectuate change. And so, Erik had brought up a comment about, a diversity statement or equity statements or things like that. And those are fine. It's just, it's about the work. It's about the work, as Taneshia pointed out. It is about the work and the impact, and who is the beneficiary of the work, and are the beneficiaries, do they have a say that this work is actually relevant and accessible to them? Is it something that they actually care about? Do they need it? And so those are issues and things that we're exploring at Dodge in our role as a grant maker. How do we ensure that where what we're doing, where we're trying to make impact, it's relevant and accessible. And so again, back to the DEI work though, it's not one size fits all. And I think that, if you're thinking about this and you're hearing these comments today and you're like, ooh, I really kind of wish I knew kind of what the magic formula was, or if I had this consultant or that consultant, or if I, looked at this statement and modeled their statement, we got it. I would just encourage you very gently to just kind of just sit back and just rethink that a little bit.
I loved in Tanishia's article where, she kind of put it to say, hey, y'all, it's not that hard. Like, there's some easy ways you could just jump right into it and get it done. And so I think while it is hard work and there are a million ways you could go about doing it, I really do appreciate that there are certain things that you could just say, here's a good first step. And so I'd say, for what it's worth, if I could give advice, one good obstacle to make sure you don't go right into is, if you're starting this journey and you're talking to the same people you've always talked to, you're probably going down the wrong path. So just right there, if you're already, huddle up as a group and start brainstorming, but if you don't get out of your own circle, you're probably going to be stuck in your own circle. And I think one piece that I would say is, in thinking about, David, what you said yesterday, and the work that we're trying to talk about, we go, okay, how do you talk to a group about healing from intergenerational trauma, from racial trauma, colonial trauma, when they don't even understand implicit bias yet? Where do you even start in that spectrum? And how do you talk to folks in a way that that's going to not only resonate, but be appropriate for where they're at in their own journey? It's a challenge, but there's so much to pick from. One thing that I wrestle with, and I don't have a clear-cut answer on or suggestion, but I think that I really like folks to think about, is this notion that while, yes, representation matters, as Tanuja pointed out, tokenism isn't beneficial for anyone. And how do we get past this idea that someone's race, for example, is different than their racialized experience, or really even recognize all the different things that make up our identity and how that impacts how we bring our work beyond whatever is easily visible. So oftentimes I think, when you think of folks who are getting further along this journey, it starts at race because folks think they can see that easily. And then they start to realize disability or things of that nature. And there's so many other different ways folks are different, and differences that people bring to their work, that can bring to their work, that I think can be looked at, that we could lose sight of if we only focus on what may be obvious at first. So I would just say, I hope folks recognize, in terms of representation, that, that's not enough if we're trying to build, like again, Tanuja mentioned in terms of her own career, if you're putting a person of color into a system that they have to then shift and mold and not be authentic to advance, are you really making progress? And I think those are the pieces that you got to look at both sides.
So as we use our last 19 minutes in a good way, I want to go get a comment that was from the chat from Sonia Harris. She made a comment that I think might be useful to lift up to the group. Sonia, could you unmute yourself and say a little bit more about what you said, and then we'll see if the panelists respond to it. And at the same time, I want to offer for other folks, if you have questions or comments, either raise your hand and Linda will keep track so we can make sure that other voices get in.
Hi everyone. This has been wonderful. First of all, let me just say, I am the founder and CEO of a small nonprofit. We're a working board. It's called the Bullock Garden Project. It's in South Jersey. I was a teacher for 25 years. I taught special education, started a garden, and became a teacher who left teaching as of October last year to do this work full time. I don't pull a salary and I'm too young to get my retirement. So the comment I had made, Tanuja was talking, and I'll be honest, I've been listening, so I'm trying to remember what she exactly had said. And I just put that I agree with what you're saying, but it was like someone like me, I'm a proud Black woman who started a nonprofit founded by majority women of color, and we can't get a seat at the table. We can't even get a seat to wait. So it's great seeing, you know, all of these BIPOC people who are at these positions, you know, in high industry. But you have to realize how disillusioning it is for someone like me, and there's more than just me, when we reach out to people who have the voice and people of color who have a platform, and it's like, no, we're pushed aside because we're small. Now, I've seen uplifting for other organizations run by people of color that are bigger. But just so you know that, please, you know, make sure that you're looking all the way down when you are reaching out. Now, the work we do this work in marginalized communities. We help build gardens to reduce food apartheid. And, you know, we struggle. I pay out of pocket to keep our lights on. But I don't know. I just feel that, you know, this is great talk. It's wonderful to hear, but I have done this for 5 years. I've written grants and everything else. And, you know, to say like, well, we didn't even put out a statement about Black Lives Matter because we were doing the work. South Jersey, where I am, we haven't been a recipient. We haven't seen recipients. We see a lot happening in North Jersey because you have a lot of the cities up there, but there's a lot of people hurting down here. A lot.
Got you.
So, you know, just saying, you need to look further. There's more than North Jersey to the state. There's more than Camden. There's more than, you know, Haddonfield. There's more than Oranges.
Well, equity. So basically, equity has a lot of different dimensions. Is your part of what you're hearing? I got you.
Yeah. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you so much for sharing.
Any other panelists want to add to that?
Quickly, I shared this last year when Tanuja and I were on a similar panel, and I do really hope that nonprofits hear this call, that again, that I've recognized it's easy for me to say, but hold us accountable, hold your funders accountable, hold philanthropy accountable, because we are in a position where we're not. And again, it's with understanding the power dynamics. It's easy for me to say that, but if y'all don't use your voice, you're not going to convince those folks that are already thinking this way. And just quickly, I saw it in the chat too, but Sonia, yes, the Community Foundation of South Jersey, we think about equity in a regional sense. Our work is only in the southern 8 counties of the state, and for those very reasons. And
I hear you, but when we reach out and we don't get calls back and we don't get emails back, imagine how that makes us feel.
I will connect with you personally.
All right.
Yeah, and I'm also willing to talk. And so I was the one who said that we didn't put out a Black Lives Matter statement because we were doing the work.
Sorry.
And we're a nonprofit. We're a nonprofit, so we're not a funder. But you could probably tell that I have a strong personality. So I've been doing this. Rick is going to say yes. Doing this work, and we didn't have money, but I found our power in that moment was stuff that was in our building. We were a place that was designated an emergency triage location. And like you, I was trying to get attention from people to let them know that we had PPE when nobody else had it. And so that was my power. I didn't have any money, but I had PPE. I had people that I knew that could help me get food. So those are the things that we were doing, and I was doing it without money. So I just want to make sure that you understand that that was my power in that moment. That was my currency. Like, hold up, we're doing stuff. And like you, I went to people and asked people to help me fund it. And they said, no, you're an arts organization. So I also got some artists that became part of our project, and it became an artist activated initiative. And to my knowledge, we're one of the few artist activated initiatives that was around wellness. And now it is in Newark, and it's called Embrace Newark. So I can definitely talk to you offline about how you can identify your power, because guaranteed you have some power that you can leverage.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I want to, a really interesting comment was made by Jose, and I'm wondering whether you want to lift that comment up for us to think about.
You're saying to speak?
Jose Montez, yeah.
Hi, I just, I work and lead a historically Hispanic founded organization, but we're now a community action agency, and we're working in a multicultural space. That doesn't mean that we've lost our identity as an organization that's been founded by a community of color, but in that space there are, it changes. I have found, because I've worked in predominantly Hispanic organizations, and it's a different conversation, and we're talking about equity and inclusion. Sometimes the conversations get weird, awkward, and people don't want to say things, or people take it a different way. Even in this conversation, there were a couple of times that folks would say white folk, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who it hit that way. And that's not to say that there isn't truth to that, but in a conversation when we're talking about equity and inclusion, sometimes I find those conversations to be disempowering and can create barriers to having authentic conversations and outcomes. Just thoughts about that.
I really appreciate you saying that. I was in a conversation just a couple, I want to hear from the panelists on this. I was in a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with a group that was called One Shared Humanity, run by this white woman and this black woman. And it was like a one-on-one podcast situation. And I talked about white folk. And it's like, when this one was kind of new to anti-racism on some level, she won a speech contest based on that, based on a really powerful thing she did. And the whole white folk thing hit her. And I'm like, what? Like, I didn't know people sometimes reacted to that. So it's really, really useful for me to hear that sometimes hits people in a way that I might not intend. But anyway, I just want to, the other panelists comment on Jose's comment about language and the complexities of it and how we have to navigate some of this stuff.
I feel like you should call a thing a thing. So that's my view. Again, I'm very conscious, for instance, about being a Black woman in a community that is, even though it's a community of color, it's not all Black, right? So there's Hispanic people, there's Asian people in the larger community, but when I'm talking about Black people, I say Black people. When I'm talking about people of color, I say people of color. And when I'm talking about white people, I say white people.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, but I would say that that's different than where, and perhaps I'm not being effective in what I'm conveying. When you're in a space where all of those populations are in there, learning how to communicate in the language, finding common language, finding words, and owning when someone reacts, and how to be able, as David said, about how to manage and negotiate those. It's not an easy thing. Sometimes it could be messy. And how do you find ways of, are there ways that have been successful that people have been able to address the truth that you're talking about, but still doing it in a way that people can actually hear and listen to each other in a constructive way that could lead to the outcome we seek, which is for all of us. And if we're in a multicultural setting, how do we still embrace the diversity and the unity at the same time?
Well, I think, and I'm going to stop because I feel like I'm dominating on this, but yes, there should be a way, but I'm going to tell you that typically what more people are comfortable with is centering white people in those conversations, even people of color. And that's where I feel like we have to move away from. You know, it just is how it is. And I say people of color are also so often more comfortable with this idea of the centering the whiteness. And I just don't think that that is the way. And maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying. I try to be open and make sure and encourage people to challenge me. So that's how I kind of navigate my world and my life. But I know that some of the people that you have to get, sometimes I don't want to use the word concessions from, but sort of acknowledgement from, may not approach life the same way. So I don't know if anybody else on the panel.
Any of the other panelists have any
Yeah.
additional comment on this whole language question?
What, something I live with?
It takes practice. I'm sorry, go ahead, Rick.
No, you first.
Thank you, Rick. I would just say this takes a lot of practice. And you've got to practice in real time. I absolutely agree with what Taneshia is saying. And some of the folks in the chat also put, this is uncomfortable. But if it was comfortable, we would already be there. And so we're all going to be uncomfortable. And I think it's important that, we name it, we acknowledge it. Shame is not a winning strategy. However, we have to hold each other accountable. And we have to practice these interventions in real time. And I will tell you personally, I'm not good at this. I'm still working on it. It's really, really hard. You will see the dynamics. You'll see dynamics within staff. You'll see dynamics within board. You'll see dynamics with grantees and any other stakeholders. But I think it's just really important to practice this. And I think it's important to, name, somebody would say, naming that this is a safe space. But what on earth does that mean if you're not feeling that you are actually truly safe? So I just think this is really about leaning into this and practicing it and being literate in conflict literacy and being able to advance conversations. And that's why I'm just going to go back to the first thing I said. This isn't easy work. And it's going to be uncomfortable. And we're not going to get past it until we keep practicing and building those muscles.
Rick, did you want to say, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, very quickly, because it's very similar to Tanuja, which is, it is very challenging. Language is very challenging to speak in a way that everybody can hear. And the subjects get sensitive, so it's easy to step on toes, either unintentionally or sometimes intentionally. I thought equity was the right topic to make some of that happen, where we could all have a place, where we could all have a perspective, where everybody can have something to offer, and where the word, it's anybody who's threatened by the word equity, then that's the problem right there, right? But that's a word that shouldn't threaten people. You may be threatened by how I interpret it, but you can interpret it yourself in a different way. And maybe that's a way for us to go forward, because there is no doubt. We all, there's a lot of different perspectives. Not everybody is prepared to see the world the way, some of us want to.
Okay.
That's what ambassadors are for, Jose.
So Linda, I want to get to that specific question before we really go to closure. I want to get that specific question that I flagged earlier. Do you remember what it was? It was about education and art.
I think it was me.
Okay.
While she's looking for that, I just want to point out that somebody did put something in the chat around shared language for the person who asked the question to make sure that he sees that.
Okay. So was that you, Amy? Is that what you said? Okay.
Yeah. So just.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I think it was, Rick, I think that you said equity to transform communities. And I'm on my local Board of Education. We're very appreciative of the Dodge Foundation. Thank you. You do a lot for us for arts integration, and it's been amazing. There's, a lot of school districts, a lot of, just very similar, but diversity, inclusion, equity are priorities. And as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking of how each district is probably reinventing this wheel, right? We know that there are, Tanuja, I think you said something about you can't just hire more people and say, okay, well, we, put a Band-Aid on it. Diversity in schools is a huge issue, but it's not, I'm just wondering if people are familiar with, anyone on here, resources for educational institutions that have programs in place that resonate long-term, aren't just short-term fixes to issues with anti-racism, diversity, and inclusion, and equity. I mean, and I'm not talking about, equity. There's great programs as far as it relates to wealth and providing computers for kids, but much more, we've touched on how everything is different for each people, and equity can mean a ton of things. But I'm just wondering if there are programs in place that anybody's aware of, or that's been effective in really educating kids, as well as programs for educators. No pressure, but if anyone put it in the chat, or someone can email it later.
So yeah, I would say that there's a great deal of work that's happening in the state of New Jersey at Dodge. We've been working on culturally responsive education, culturally responsive arts education, a series of networks for like pre-K to 12, curriculum. I'd love to be able to connect with you separately, or, through Linda, to just share some resources, but I just don't have them off the top of my head, and links and things. But, this is also something that, we're really curious about at Dodge, in terms of, a really concerted effort on anti-racism curriculum, and also, how we could, amplify, the higher ed sector in the state of New Jersey in deploying such curriculum. We can't do this alone at Dodge. This is something that, this is a big sector-wide thing. And so that is also something that we're thinking about in terms of how we can really make the greatest impact. I hope that helps.
That would be great. Because, I know, like, in our district, and it sounds like I'm just looking at the chat really quickly, I'm sure we're not alone. We're meeting with our community. We're holding roundtables and focus groups with alumni, trying to really figure out how to sprint ahead and really make an impact the right way and do things the right way. And so I'm glad that we had this conversation, because if, every district sat here repeating themselves, although I'm going to reach out to you, Nancy, it's a challenge. So thank you. And I appreciate all the work that you're all doing too.
Sure. So we're about at time. We are at time. So I guess I just want to see if I probably should have done this 5 minutes ago, but I want to see if any of the panelists have any final comments and things they wanted to get out before we fully close. This has been a great conversation, but I wanted to, because y'all have so much wisdom, I wanted to make sure there's nothing that you can't get everything, but anything else I want to add to this?
In the spirit of transforming philanthropy, certainly public service is making a greater commitment to equity. And we will be interested in hearing the thoughts and ideas of people out there who are interested in advancing and pursuing equity in a variety of scenarios. So hopefully equity will also be an inspiration for better ideas, better conversations, and maybe help some people who in the past we were not able to help. Yeah,
I would say that, this was a really good dialogue. The chat was pretty fantastic too. You know, Dodge is a learning organization. You know, we are also in the midst of our journey. You know, part of our mandate is to keep listening, keep learning, and start applying, or apply some more. So again, with humility, we are not everything or in all, as somebody kind of put that in the chat, and we don't like espouse to be, but we do really want to do the right thing and really make a positive difference and create a better future, as Rick says, for New Jerseyans and maybe even beyond. So thank you. This was, thank you.
Yeah. So, so I would just say that as we try to go forward, let's remember that what we're trying to do has never been done, right? You know, we're trying to build a fully inclusive multicultural democracy that 20 years from now won't even have a majority population, and might even, and this whole discussion is about trying to have shared power within that. I don't think that's been done in the past. So we need to keep pushing ourselves forward, pushing other people forward, and recognize that we're doing something that's not been done in human history. And so the balance between the fervor and the push, and the grace we give to ourselves and others who might need a tune-up, I think we need to remember that we're doing something that is unprecedented in human history. And I want to congratulate the Nonprofit Association for bringing us together to try to advance our thinking about that. So I will throw it back to Linda, but with great appreciation as I do so, and to the panel too.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Taneshia, Rick, Erik. I wish this could have gone on for much, much longer. This was such a tremendous conversation. Thank you, everybody who has been contributing in the chat and raising your voices. Certainly, you know, we're very committed to the work. We're committed to creating or finding opportunities and listening ourselves. As Tanuja said, you know, our learning certainly doesn't end, and we want to be as effective as we can be in our role as a Center for Nonprofits. Let me make a couple of suggestions, commitments, just some follow-up things that we've been promising throughout. Number one, everything in this conference has been recorded, and we will be following up very shortly with the recordings, with any of the materials that our speakers, panelists, breakout sessions promised. David, I will follow up with you on your some of the things from your keynote yesterday. So we'll be packaging that and putting that out shortly, probably next week sometime. Probably will not be by tomorrow. Use the app. The app the app is going to be live for probably close to a year. Use that as a forum to keep connecting with each other, to follow up with on these conversations. People have launched amazing connections in the app. So do that. That's open. It's available to you as conference goers. Some logistic kinds of things, you know, please complete your evaluation in the app, or we'll be sending something out about that. Wherever possible, we will have the chats. So you'll be able to have benefited from the wisdom of your colleagues. But, you know, keep this going. This is, you know, this is so vital, and what we are doing together is so important. So we need to stay connected, and that can be really hard when we break away from these gatherings and then just kind of get immersed in our own you know, missions, the day-to-day work. Our day-to-day work involves being connected, but it's a different kind of thing. So I've talked long enough. I cannot thank all of you enough for today's session, for everybody who has been part of this experience over the last 2 days and has really been present. We are pledged to be here for you. Let us know how we can help. Send suggestions. We are in the throes of not only our strategic planning, but our program planning for the upcoming months. So we want to be here for you, and we want to be as effective and helpful and as good a champion and ally as we can. So on that note, let me thank you all again. Stay well, stay safe, and we look forward to staying in touch. Take good care.
Thank you.